Okay, I'm Julia, and our team did the Alexander the New Jim Crow article about the injustices in like the justice system. And first part of the article talked about how there's lots of media coverage of people asking like where all the black men have gone and like what happened to all these black fathers and calling out black fathers for not being present. But there's really no media coverage of like as to why, like where actually did these people go. And I think it really shows how one-sided and like not great the media is, because we only really ever see like pictures of people getting locked up for like insane like bad crimes, but we never really see how there's almost 1 million black men in prisons due to the war on drugs, and sometimes it's just like minimal drug charges, and there's no coverage on it, and we're just kind of it forces us into denial because we only ever see what we see on TV, and it's just become so normal. And yeah, I just think the media needs to do a better job of covering and really point out that the war on drugs is still going on. And I just think the media needs to do better.
I'm Kayla Kleinfelder, by the way, and honestly, I think we can make a connection with that, with like police brutality, with like the mass incarceration of people of color, and especially like in recent years, we've seen a lot of like police brutality, especially like the summer of 2020, which that got like a lot of media coverage, but like after that, it kind of like faded away, if that makes sense. And you can also make like the connection of mass incarceration with like the Jim Crow era, because like with like the Jim Crow era, it was politicians constantly competing with one another to see like, oh, who can make a more discriminating law. And then with mass incarceration, we also have politicians who are like, let's see how many laws I can make to kind of put people in jail. Like, how many people can I put in jail? And that's kind of like the connection that was made there. And it's really unfair.
Okay, I'm Sarah, and as Kayla said, that in the summer of 2020, all of the news started dying out. And so I see that as an issue that with mass incarceration, it's only present to the society when there's something major happening in the news, not like consistently with all the incarcerations that are happening. And so the society isn't seeing mass incarceration as an issue, and there's going to be no fix for it until everybody actually sees it as an issue.
It's Lila, and I also agree with some of the points made about the connection between the Jim Crow and the mass incarcerations that we face today. I think a lot of it has to do with like racial opportunism and just discriminatory biases.
It's Julia again. Going off on that, I think in the lecture there was a metaphor made for like a bird cage by Marion Young. She made that like metaphor with racism, and I think what Lila was saying like really like reiterates that, because there's like discrimination and like embedded into US society, and we never really like think about it. Like, I'm sure people think about it, but we don't really see the full picture, partially like I said earlier because of the media. And people are also like quick to assume, like going back to the birdcage metaphor, like there's always a door and like there's always a way that people can get out of a rough position that they're in, and like they don't have to. People always say all the time, oh, like they're going down the wrong path, like they need to help themselves. But we also, the birdcage thing really like points out how like different aspects of racism and discrimination in people's lives that we might be oblivious to, and like you only might know it if like it's happening to you. I really think that that is a big issue because it's happening in everyday lives and no one really like knows about it. So yeah.
One part that like really like stood out to me in this entire article was just like the parallels between Jim Crow and like mass incarceration, because people think that we're like over the time period in which Jim Crow laws were around, but like we're not, and we're still seeing this racism and like bias just every day, which again like comes back to the media, but like at the same time the media hasn't really been doing its job. Yeah.
Like furthering what Kayla's saying, there's more black adults under correctional control today than enslaved Africans in 1850, like right around Jim Crow times. And like a black child born today is less likely to have both parents than a black child born during slavery. And I think that really just like shows how many parallels like are really present. And yeah, I just think people, what we think of when we think of racism is like different than how it's embedded into our society today, but like it's still very prominent. And yeah.
Something else to add that just like popped into my head. In like the article, it was like talking about like a statistic of if a black man were to be considered a felon before, like, I think like from ages 18 to 21, he is forever going to be kind of like an outcast in society, which in a way is like, I don't know, like it's just worse than like, I don't know how to word this. Like, it's just like, it makes it hard for them to get jobs, and it's just like the racism, and it all ties in together because it's all like related.
Julia, again, furthering what Kayla was saying, there was a quote in the article that said like discrimination is basically legalized today because once it's on your criminal record, it gives them the right to deny you from a job or like to deny you from housing or stuff like that. So it really just shows like you might not know until it happens to you, but like once you're in like a constant cycle once you become a criminal. And yeah.
This is Sarah, and going off what Julia said, it's pretty much like the invisible punishment, what it's called in the article, is life after being released. So ex-prisoners aren't given nearly as many rights and just basic needs that they should be given once they're released. They struggle to find employment and housing and education, and once they're released, they tend to go back to the same neighborhood that they were arrested in, and they will recommit the crime and just go right back into the prison system, and it's just a non-stop cycle.
Yeah. So does anyone else have anything to say?
It's like it is like a constant cycle, and I think as a society we need to have like more opportunities for like ex-convicts, like people who used to be in jail, so they can get out of the cycle and break out of the cycle and kind of change how society accepts them.
It's Lila. I also wanted to add a quote from my chapter, The Limits of Analogy. Economist Glenn Loury made this observation in his book, The Anatomy of Racial Inequality. He noted that it's nearly impossible to imagine anything remotely similar to mass incarceration happening to young white men. Can we envision a system that would enforce drug laws almost exclusively among young white men and largely ignore drug crime among young black men? This just like stood out to me because I feel like it's true, and one of the main factors and causes of discriminatory practices and overall inequalities that we face today, and it just connects to the new Jim Crow laws. And yeah.
So yeah, that's what we had to think about the Alexander the New Jim Crow article.
Thank you for listening.